kicking off, as the screen says, a new sermon series over the course of this month called Making Change. We're talking about investing in healthy relationships between faith and our finances, or our faith and our money. And the reason that we're doing this is because among all of the things that have created unhealthy or toxic or triggering relationships between life and faith, faith and finances are among those things that oftentimes cause us to get uncomfortable. When we're in a conversation with someone, if we're at dinner with them, like talking about money, talking about politics and religion is something you would probably not do. And so we figured let's talk about two of the three of them for the rest of the month here in church. So it should be fun. But I'm excited to be doing this. I think it actually is going to be a really healthy one. I was talking to someone earlier this week and saying, like, as I was doing some thought around this, like, I realized, like, I have a lot of, like, baggage or trauma maybe is another word for it when I look back in my upbringing around faith and finances. And it's something that I would usually just try to avoid, either as someone growing up in church and even early on in my pastoral career. I was like, I don't really want to talk about it because it makes me uncomfortable. And I realized that there are certain things that I was taught or told or things that I experienced growing up that told me this would be an uncomfortable conversation. And the more time I spent around it and the more time I spent around other people that had healthy relationships in this arena, I realized that it wasn't necessarily the conversation that was uncomfortable, but it was some of the things I perceived to be true about the conversation that made it uncomfortable for me. And so over the course of this, like, there are a couple of main objectives. First and foremost is to demystify and maybe pull some of the shame away from this conversation. Like, maybe you grew up in a situation where you were shamed for going to church and you didn't hit that tithe number, you didn't hit the number that they set for you to hit, and that gave you a ton of shame and guilt, like that you weren't sowing enough into God's ministry, and therefore because of that, God wasn't blessing you. Like, we want to pull away some of that shame. We also want to be able to talk about the beauty and the goodness that comes out of our generosity. And so not just pull in the stuff that makes it difficult, but really point to the reason that we find this to be a beneficial conversation, which is kind of the rubric for anything that we bring into this space. Like, we want to talk about something that we think is going to point us closer to Jesus, give us value, and drawing closer to Him and really relating our life into people that follow Him. And so that's what we're going to be talking about here over the course of these next couple of weeks. And I was doing a little research, and so I went to where I usually go to do my most academic research, which was to BuzzFeed. And I wanted to read you some stats I found on a BuzzFeed article. I'll tell you about 500,000 people took this poll. And so it's a lot of people that interact in this. And the question was, what would you do for $5 million? And maybe you might like have, you wouldn't say anything. Yeah, what would you do to get $5 million? Like, and here's some interesting things that people say. So 96% of people, this one blew my mind. 96% of people said they would never take a bath again for the rest of their life for $5 million. No, babe, sorry, any sort of, like, they wouldn't do any cleansing for the rest of their life. And I'm the kind of person, I shower in the morning and ideally shower at night, and if I'm going to the gym in the day, I will also shower in the middle of the day. And so the idea of going from potentially 3 showers to none for $5 million, I'm not sure that's a return on investment. Million. But we can say billion. Million. 86%, this one was also quite mind-boggling. 86% of people said they would chop off the thumb of their dominant hand for $5 million. That's no more texting. That's no more thumbs ups. I mean, that's hard for me. I'm a big thumbs up guy. Like I said, no. But 86% of people said they would do that. 76% of people said they would do this. Maybe you remember me saying, if you were here, I talked about one of my biggest, like, things I hated about seminary. When I went to seminary, is every year we would do a 6-hour silent retreat. And that was like torture to me. Being alone, not talking, like, that was brutal. Well, 76% of people said that they would spend 20 years in solitude for $5 million. My question is, what are you going to do with it, right? Yeah, it's like, it was wild to me. 70% of people said they would go to prison, maximum security prison, for 5 years for a crime they didn't commit for $5 million once they got out. Like, that, I might die too. And 50% of people said, this one blew my mind the most, actually, like, this hurt my heart a little bit. 50% of people said that they would take $5 million if they knew that at random someone in the world somewhere would die. Right, it could be someone close to them, it could be someone else. Now, here's what we have to say. 2017 BuzzFeed article, stakes are pretty low here. You get a lot of people just clicking things. probably true even in those statistics, right? The idea, I mean, I think something said 70% of people said they would only listen to country music for the rest of their life for 5 minutes. Some people might be like, this is a dream. Others might be like, that, I wouldn't do that for any amount of time. But what I struck me on this is that for many of us, our eyes are kind of fixed on what we don't have. Like our eyes are fixed on the more that we can get, the more we can attain, the idea that there's this next thing that we can get, this next thing that we can grab, and this sum of money that like, hey, maybe if I get this, that maybe I will finally be fulfilled, right? I have a house that is wonderful and it fits my family and it works really well, and I also still sit on my phone at night on Redfin or Zillow and be like, what if I just had one more bathroom, or one more bedroom, or just like 500 more square feet. There's this idea that whether it's money or houses, I mean, many of us go job shopping, right? Like we're looking for that next thing. And like, I think many of us get caught up in this idea of striving for more. And if I was gonna like point out a problem that comes up into the intersection of a healthy relationship between faith and our finances, is that we are kind of stuck in this endless pursuit of more. That we're stuck in this kind of pursuit of saying like, well, I don't have enough. I don't have everything I need. If I just get this next thing, if I just find the thing that's down the road, if I just make a little bit more, my house is a little bit bigger, if I can just chop off my thumb for $5 million, like life will finally be everything that I thought it was going to be. And just like the chopping off the thumb example, I don't think that we fully think about the repercussions of our actions or what we do to get there. Sometimes the ends become the means for us, or whatever that saying is supposed to be said, and then we pursue for ourselves the end, and it becomes more important than every step along the way of the journey because we're endlessly pursuing more. And Jesus knew this would be something that wrestled with our hearts, something that like got us tied up, and something that was quite hard for us to be able to reconcile. And in his the Gospel of Luke in the 12th chapter, Jesus is having these conversations with different people. It comes at this point where people are like asking him pretty big questions, and one of them comes around faith and finances, around what do we do with our money and what is the right amount and should we store up? And I have this rich friend, like, does God love this person or do I need to live in poverty? Like, what is the right answer for me when it comes to this intersection of my faith and finance? And he tells a story of this guy, and I just wanted to read you a little bit of an excerpt from it. It comes from Luke 12, verses 13 through 15. So he's telling the story of this rich young person. He like has the best production of his crops he's ever had. So he's like, I'm going to tear everything down. I'm going to build up new things on top of it. So it's like, I don't know if you saw this in the news, but Chris Pratt bought this like a $2 million architectural gym and tore it down to build up like a more expensive mansion on top of it. Now, like that's kind of a value neutral statement I'm saying, but what you could say is like you looked at this thing, it was already beautiful, that actually they were trying to get registered as like a historical site, and he said, well, maybe I should just take this down and build something new on top of it. And that's kind of what this person is doing in this story. It's like, I want to be able to tear down the already good things I have. I want to build up even bigger and better things so that I can have a celebration, I can have a party, I can retire early, and I can spend all my money on myself and other people. And he says this, Jesus says, man, who appointed me to be the judge or arbiter between you? So, really quick, this person is saying, like, what is this person doing with their money? Are they doing things right? Are they doing things wrong? And I put this first line in here because you could have just went into what Jesus said, but you can hear Jesus' frustration and annoyance, like, at the start. It's like, man, like, who appointed me to be the one between your bickering? Like, who's the one that told me I was supposed to decide this between you guys? Like, my hope for you would be that you guys could have healthy enough relationships and you could see the pitfalls and you could see the things that are in your way, and you could already hear the frustration in his voice. Then it says that he says this thing, he says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And the last line is the important one. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Life doesn't consist in an abundance of possessions. And for this person that Jesus is having this conversation with, he's tearing everything down. He's had the best month, best year, the best economic season of his life. And he's saying, I have all these things, I'm going to tear them down. I'm going to try to accrue even more things. I'm going to try to get even more possessions because that's where I think the abundance of my life can come from. And what I think this person misses in this story is that at this moment, before any of this construction and reconstruction takes place, like he was already a rich person. He was already a wealthy person. He was already doing quite well. Like, he was blessed and he was stable, his income was doing all right. Like, he was already in a very healthy place. He was already what people would probably said was rich. He was probably in a place where people would have looked at him as the top percent of his community's income earners. But he says, I want more. And Jesus says, I warn you against the potential of greed, that abundance in life is not found in the abundance of possessions. And so if the problem is this endless pursuit of more, well, I began to ask myself, well, what is, and we see this in the story, and I think we see this in our lives as well. Well, if that's the problem, then there has to at least hopefully be a solution for that. Like, there has to be potentially something that if we shift from this to that, that'll help us be able to embrace this more. And I look at the story of this person and the 86% of people that said this and the 96% that said that, and the people that are always pursuing and driving for more. I think the issue at its core is a pursuit of more based out of a mindset of scarcity versus abundance, right? This idea that I can never have enough, that things are always a little too scarce, that there's never enough for me, that if I just get a little bit more, then I can live in abundance. And I don't know if you've ever been there. Like, I've been in that season of life where I look around and it looks like everything around, like, I am well taken care of. But I look at all these wonderful things around me, my friends, my faith, my family, my finances, and I look at them as if there's a deficit. I look at it as if there's a scarcity, and I say, well, if there was just a little bit more time, right? But the reality is I could shift my time around, right? Like, I could reallocate this. If I had a little bit more money, well, it's like I didn't need to buy $200 Jordans this week, right? Like, if I just had a little bit of a better this or that, right? There's this pursuit of looking at things and always striving for more that is driven behind this idea of scarcity versus abundance. And I was looking at some stats from World Vision, and if you don't know World Vision, they do like mission work around poverty, both in our country, but global poverty. And I was looking at, like, because I rarely, if I just hey, raise your hand and tell me if you think you're rich, I think most of us would be like, well, I'm not rich, right? We wouldn't feel that way. But as I was looking at these stats, proportionally, I think many of us are doing much better than we probably imagined that we are, right? I was looking at this, if you drove your car to get here, and you could, and I almost ran out of gas today on my way. I had zero, and I had to stop and get gas, and that was terrifying to me. But even by being able to do that, to notice I was almost out of gas, and to be able to go get gas, I'm in the top 15% of the wealthiest people globally, just by being able to drive and being able to fill up my gas tank. And 37 million Americans live in poverty. About 11.1 of those are children. 11.1 million of those are children. So 37 million Americans live in poverty. That's a lot of people. But what you may not know is that 9.2% of the global population, that's 719 million people, live on less than $2.15 a day. There's a group of people that live in what is not just called poverty, but called extreme poverty. And when I lived in Portland, I worked for this mission organization called Kaleo Missions, and we would do work with homeless ministry. There was a big homeless population in our community. We would go to this thing called the Real Life Exhibit. It was put on by an organization called Medical Teams International. We would go through it, and at the end of it, there would be this comparison of talking about what we could have done with our $2.15 that we got, we brought there, and the reality that there are people, striving for that on a regular basis just to be able to make ends meet, living on that for a day's income. And I maybe stopped at Starbucks on the way to the Real Life Exhibit and spent $3.50 for a coffee. And I only bring that up to say this, that there is this perspective that we have that I think we're always striving for more. We're always saying, well, I'm not in the bracket financially that I hoped I was in. I'm not in the neighborhood that I thought I was going to be in. I'm not in the C-suite of jobs, and so I'm not bringing in the money that I want to bring in. There is this perspective shift where we look around and we feel like we're living in scarcity, but we look around at the world and see that, there are people that aren't just in our own country, the 37 million that are living in poverty, but the 719 million people that globally are living in extreme poverty on less than $2.15 a day. And I would also say, not to diminish, I know many of the stories of our congregation, there are people that are living in dire circumstances and financial hardships, whether it's through relational stuff or diagnoses or medical bills or debt or whatever. So that is not to diminish the reality that there are financial burdens and realities of the culture and the society that we live in. But a perspective shift, I think, is often something that can help us as we look at this conversation of faith and finances to realize that by no way of our own, we've kind of ended up in a situation that is proportionally quite blessed in comparison to many other people globally. And even though we often feel as if we are struggling, proportionally we live in a place where globally they would look at us and say, like, you're rich. And that's an interesting perspective to shift to. I remember going to Mozambique in Africa. We partnered with churches there and built schools and built wells. And I remember going there. And a weird fact about me, I'm like really afraid to hold a chicken. Like, it's just something that I don't love to do. And it turns out that's like a real big sign of respect in Mozambique. Like if someone gives you a chicken and you don't take it, it's like a massive sign of disrespect. And I'm just like getting pumped up in the van by the Mozambican guy that's with me. He's like, I need you to know that regardless of how little you want to hold this chicken, you will be handed on. I'm like, well, why can't you just do it for me, right? Can't you just hold this? Can't you just like jump in front and be the superhero? And the response he gave me like was really interesting. He's like, well, you have to understand that like this is them giving this community like what they've saved up for. They're giving out of an abundance, not out of a scarcity. They're giving out of all they have, something that they could have been saving up to eat themselves, living in maybe not extreme poverty, but proportional poverty to where we are. And they are giving out of an abundance of their heart, knowing the way that it would impact our community, knowing that we would eat that for dinner that night. That was something that we weren't saving for later. Like they were giving it to us for the purpose of consumption later. And it shifted my mindset, knowing this person that when I looked at their circumstance, like they don't have much to give. Like they don't have much to celebrate, looking at my proportional life and my house and my community and all that. Like that was them giving out of the abundance of what they had in a way to say like, this is something that we really care for. And so I had to like suck it up and be like, this is the greatest chicken I've ever held in my life, and thank you so much for giving this to me. But it shifted my perspective. I wonder like how much we think about that sort of generosity that we have, right? Like when we're giving, where that giving and that heart is coming from, and how we're engaging with not only what we have, but how that interacts with other people. And so I think shifting from scarcity to abundance is something that's radically important as we build this healthy relationship. But the other thing that I was thinking about is the other problem is that we're kind of always chasing carrots, right? Like the scale is always moving a little bit further. And you maybe know this through like measuring your salary, right? And this will be a weird start to this conversation, but I promise it'll make sense. I remember sitting in a hot tub with the father of the girl I was dating at the time, and we were sitting there, and he like looks across at me, and he's like, hey, how are you going to support my daughter if you get married? And I'm like, man, I thought we were just chilling in this hot tub. Let's turn a shift. I thought we were just saying that. And he's like, how are you going to support my daughter if you get married? And I was like, well, David, let me tell you. I'm going to be a youth pastor, and I want you to know that global statistics say that youth pastors make somewhere in the $25,000 to $30,000 a year range. And once I make that, we will be financially stable, and we will never have to make more ever again. And I meant that wholeheartedly. And you probably have said something like that in your life before too. Like if I just hit this number, then I'll be happy. Well, you know what happened is I hit $25,000 and I realized that I couldn't make ends meet with that, or at least I perceived that I couldn't. And then I was like, well, I just could make $40,000, then ends would meet. If we could just have this much in household income, and then things would finally be able to work. And it seems like even where I'm at today, like the carrot continues to move. Like the treadmill never stops, and like I'm continually striving after this. And I imagine that you might be in a similar place, like this idea that if we just get a little bit more, then we'll finally be stable. But the goalpost, the carrot, like keeps moving in front of us. And Gallup is an organization that does polls. They do things like Strength Finders. If you've ever done the Strength Finder assessment, they also do like global pooling of like certain things. And they did a study. They asked people who made $30,000 a year how much they thought they needed to be rich. That was the question. Like, what do you need to be rich? And they said we need $74,000 a year, so just a little bit over double, right? And then some of you might be like, why bring that in either individually or collectively? And like that, I don't feel rich there, right? I don't feel rich there. Well, they also asked people who made $50,000 a year, like, what do they need to feel secure? And they said, well, I need double that. I need $100,000. And there's kind of a theme, right? This idea of like, well, if I'm just in this place, then I can make a little bit more, and then I would be financially stable. They actually asked the top percent of earners what they would need, and they said they would need $5 million in assets. So if you have like $1 or $2 million in assets, like you're broke as a joke. But if you have $5 million you're crushing, right? This idea that like even the wealthier you get or the lower on the spectrum you are, like the scale is kind of always moving, and the scale is always kind of shifting for us as we try to figure out like what is going to make us feel healthy. And the problem is this kind of carrot chasing mentality. And Jesus talks about this. So the story kind of continues in this conversation we're having around this rich person and then tearing things down, and we're having this celebration. So the story continues in Luke 12, starting in verse 20. It says, God says to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then you will get what you have prepared for yourself. And this is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves and is rich, but is not rich towards God." So this idea that like you're rich in this world, but you're not rich towards God. Like this idea if you store things up or you're always chasing carrots, like eventually you're going to find out that like the abundance wasn't found in there. Back to the thing Jesus said in the first life in abundance doesn't consist in an abundance of possessions. And as we're chasing these carrots and we're on this treadmill, like Jesus is even warning here, like at the end of it, when we get to the end of this road and this journey and we're standing in that place and it's that final moment and we're wondering like, man, like did having just a little bit more actually provide the abundance that I was looking for? And if I was to say the problem is that we're chasing carrots, well, the solution might be, like, what would that be? And I would say that rather than chasing carrots, I think chasing or striving for what is eternal rather than what is fleeting is going to be what provides that for us. And when I think about things that are eternal, like, well, what does that mean? Like, what are the things that are eternal, right? Well, I think that the relationship that we cultivate with God is something that is eternal, right? Our relationship with Jesus is something that is eternal. I think our relationship with one another is something that is eternal. I think the way that we steward what God has given us, this idea that as we are given, that we are able to be generous back to God and help those that are living in poverty or those that are living in extreme poverty, even though we don't perceive ourselves as someone that is rich, being able to help those that are struggling, either locally or globally, to be able to make these things, be able to help them be able to understand that they are loved, that they are known, be able to get a little bit ahead. One of the things, and this is not a political statement, but one of the things that is hard is oftentimes we're like, well, I got myself here. Like I worked really hard, like I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I got here. And the reality is like, if we believe that to be true, then we would be shaming everyone that's living in global poverty for not being able to pull themselves up, right? The idea is that where we sit in our lives, we are quite blessed by no virtue of anything that we have done. But the reality, and Jesus actually talks about this, is like those that are blessed, something is expected, right? Those that are blessed, there's an idea to be able to be a blessing to the world. God actually says this to Abraham as the nations are coming together. Like God speaks to Abraham in the Old Testament and he said, I'm going to build a nation through you. And he's like, this is dope. This is going to be so cool. We're going to build this thing together. It's going to be wonderful. And then God says back to Abraham, well, it's not just going to be a blessing to yourself, though. It's not just going to be a blessing to you or to your family or to your descendants or even to the Abrahamic people, which is his lineage and his family, but you're going to be a blessing to the world. You're going to be a blessing to those outside of yourselves. And I think that is what we think about when we fix our eyes on what is eternal versus what is fleeting. If we believe in a God that's not just creating all new things, but is bringing life back to things that are broken, breathing life back into things that are broken and making those things new, not throwing them away and not creating brand new things. If God is breathing life back into all things, the things that are eternal is the way that we can be able to collaborate with God and breathing life back into those broken things in our world. And maybe if you've never like chased carrots, here's like something that I would say, like, and I've been a part of that at different phases of my life, and even now there are certain times in areas that I do that. And what I would say is like the endless pursuit of more, like the fleeting, the striving for things that are fleeting hasn't fixed problems, right? Like being more affluent or rich doesn't keep myself or my kids off of drugs. It doesn't like keep us out of addiction. And I even argue that it makes it harder for that, right? Like it doesn't fix those problems. It's never like cured a diagnosis, right? It's never brought back together a broken relationship. Like the endless pursuit of those things, though they can help our lives, don't actually fix some of those problems that are happening. But the reality is that we believe in a God that is provisional, and a God that is eternal, and a God that actually is a part of putting those things back together, breathing life back into those things. And so for us, as we're beginning down this series, I think the hardest shift for us whether we talk about like what we do with our money, or how we do that, or how we save it, or how we go about that, or how we build this relationship, I think it starts with how we just view faith and finance at the baseline level. And so my challenge for you to be like, in this week, as you kind of journey through the normal rhythms of your life, really like try to put on a lens of saying like, where am I looking at things in either scarcity or abundance, right? Where am I looking at things where it's like, I just wish that I had a little bit more? Where are the areas that's like, I feel like it's crumbling and I don't have enough? And ask yourself that, and do some inventory, because maybe the reality is there is a scarcity there. And as we look at that with like introspective and eyes, I think that will help us see that. But also, I think look and see like, where are the areas that I'm viewing things with abundance? Where are the areas that I have been blessed, that I've been blessed with maybe more than I need, and that God might be challenging me to embrace that and to celebrate that, and maybe at the end even use that to bless other people that are living in scarcity and not abundance. And I think as we do that, it begins to shift our mindset. Shift our mindset from not just what is temporary, not just what is fleeting, not just what is like right here, but it helps us fixate our eyes on a God that is eternal. A God that is abundant and greater than anything we could ever ask or imagine, a God that provides for us, a God that walks with us, a God that is not fleeting, but a God that is eternal. And so, over the course of this series, I think it's going to be interesting, it's going to be fun. My greatest hope is that it's challenging. I often get like challenged by people saying like, well, you know, you're a Christian that like is all about love and all about grace and all about inclusion. And I am about all those things. I think that's actually true. I'm also about challenge. Like, I think we should be people that are constantly challenged by Jesus in all that we do, and trying not to find ourselves in a place where we're so comfortable that we isolate ourselves from challenge. And so as we build healthy frameworks, as we build ways that we can understand this relationship between faith and finance, I hope that we demystify it. I hope we take away some of the shame. I hope in many ways we're challenged. And at the end of it, my greatest hope is that God does something fresh and new in and through us as we journey this road together. With that in mind, would you pray with me? God, I do know that many of us bring in different stories and different backgrounds, different levels of good and bad baggage when it comes to this conversation of faith and finances. And I just ask that whatever it is that we bring in, that you would help us give that over to you. Give it over to you and believe that you can do something with it. Churches often talk about like financial offerings, that like that's the offering that we give, but I truly believe that there is a spiritual offering we give as we give over to you a trust that you are truly where abundant life is found. And so God, I just ask that you would help us stir that in our heart, that we might be able to give to you from a heart of scarcity, to believe that you can fill us with a spirit of abundance, to help us strive for not the things that are